Hey guys, Mike here from epicduckstudios. Today I'm going to be painting the Coffin on this Malifaux Guild Death Marshal. To begin with, I've primed the miniature with Army Painter Leather Brown Primer, and I'm going to start by using some Vallejo Game Color Earth. I'm going to be applying this as a general base coat to the whole coffin, so I'm going to use a wide, broad brush for this. This color is very similar to the Army Painter Primer, so you're not going to see a whole lot of difference right away. Here I'm loading the brush up, making sure it's got a good reservoir of paint without any large drops on the outside. I'm breaking this model down into different bits because there's a lot of distinct details on it that require very different techniques, so I thought breaking it down into shorter clips was more natural than painting the whole thing at once. So right now I'm going over the whole coffin with this earth color in a bit of a dry brushing style technique. Because the primer is a little bit darker than this earth color, I want to leave the primer in the deepest recesses and letting this take hold on most of the surfaces. Now I'm switching to a slightly lighter shade. I'm using Game Color Khaki here. This is quite a bit lighter than the last color we've used, and I'm not going to use it directly. You can actually see I'm mixing the two colors together to get some interim shades. Right now I'm just wiping off any excess paint on the brush. Again, I'm going to use a technique very similar to dry brushing, but I'm focusing more on the sharper edges here, the outside edges of each of the surfaces of the coffin. Basically, I want the wood to look more worn towards the outer edges, and typically that can be achieved by making the wood look a bit lighter. I'm going to mix in just a little bit more of the khaki into our blend here, because I want it to be just a little bit lighter than it currently is. In a few places, the khaki color is a little too prominent, so I'm going to go back with a slightly darker color and work from the inside of the panel. Next, using almost straight khaki, I'm going to go ahead and really grab the edges of the coffin. Again, I'm going to use a little bit of a darker shade just to blunt those edges slightly. Now using straight khaki, I'm going to just do one sharp edge highlight around the coffin. Next, I'm going to paint the chains that are wrapped around the coffin. I'm going to base coat these using Vallejo gunmetal. I'm going to add depth to the coffin and the chains later using a dark wash, so it's really not too important that I get the metal color in the deeper parts of the chain. I really just need to focus on the surface here. I'm using a bit of a back and forth motion with my brush to make sure I get paint on both sides of each chain link. Now I'm going to go over the entire coffin with an Agrax Earthshade wash. This is a dark brown wash that does a really good job of picking out the different panels on the coffin and will really help the chain get some definition. I'm being very generous with how much of this wash I use because I want nice deep shadows from it. I'm applying the wash in the direction of the wood plank so I can make sure it works into the different crevices. Now I need to let the wash dry for a while. This is a really good time to work on a different miniature. Okay, the wash is dry now, and you can see there's definitely more distinction between the planks of wood in the coffin and between the different parts of the chain. I'm finding the coffin a little bit flat though, so I'm going to use some Vallejo Bone White to bring a little more contrast to the miniature. I'll be using a very stiff bristled brush to dry brush this color on. This particular kind of brush is called a stippler and is actually made out of hog bristle. When you're dry brushing, you want to make sure your brush is dry, as the name implies. What this means is you want to basically get the liquid component out of the paint, and so there's really just powdered pigment left in your brush. Dry brushing works best when there's a lot of detail on a miniature, because what happens is the pigment grabs onto the sharp edges. If you have a model with a lot of smooth surfaces or a lot of big flat surfaces, dry brushing doesn't work very well. In this case though, we have a lot of hard lines it can grab onto. You might notice that some of the bone white is getting on the chain while I dry brush. I'm going to go back and highlight parts of the chain later, so this isn't really a concern. Using a flat brush, I'm now going to apply a second wash of Agrax Earthshade. This time I'm going to do it in much thinner coats though, because I'm actually using it to tint the surface and draw all the colors together, rather than using it for shading like normal. Applying a thin glaze like this over a couple different colors helps bind them together, and is a technique known as filtering. Because I'm applying the wash so much thinner, it dries almost instantly. I want the wood to take on a little bit of a warmer tone, so I'm going to use some sepia wash and just go over it like I did with the last wash, applying a little bit of a tint. The quick glaze of the sepia wash has really gone a long way to making the wood more warm and interesting. The chains around the coffin are looking pretty boring and a little lackluster, especially where the bone white got dry brushed on them. So I'm going to use some Vallejo Game Color Chainmail Silver, which is a much brighter metal, and just bring a little more vibrance back to parts of the chain. I'm mostly focusing on the upward facing chains, and especially on the front of the model. And that's it. The coffin's done. There's still a long way to go with this miniature though. Next, I'll be painting the fire. Thanks for watching, and as always, do something epic.